All right, welcome. So, have you ever tried to break a bad habit but find yourself constantly slipping back into it? This is actually just because you keep trying to stop the bad habit, but you are missing the important step of actually replacing that habit with something better, more productive, more effective at what you're trying to do. So, for example, if you're trying to, let's say, quit weed, right? You relax at the end of the day with a joint or with a bowl. You could replace that habit with something that is actually relaxing. So for example, me, I relax by reading a book, right? So my relaxing activity is reading. So if you can identify why you do the bad habit and somehow replace it with something that will be more effective at doing the thing you're looking to do. So another example can be social media, right? If you're watching a lot of social media, the craving that you're having is consumption of information, not so much the pleasure associated with it. It is the dopamine that comes as a result of pursuing information, pursuing knowledge, even if it's degenerate knowledge and information or it's just brain rot. It's still the consumption and processing of information that you're actually seeking there. So if you're able to identify that and then see, okay, well, instead of going on TikTok, I can go on YouTube and find an educational video that's a little bit longer. This can transition you from the overstimulation from TikTok and from social medias over to a longer drawn out process of learning information and taking in real knowledge, right? And so there's many, many examples that I could use for what exactly you could do, what habits you could replace it with. But this video is just going to teach you how to identify which habits to break, why you do them in the first place, and then what habits can replace them, and then actually how to go about that transition period, right? So if you're only trying to replace it, but you are not giving yourself a better use of your time and attention, you will constantly find yourself slipping back, right? When the triggers come up in your brain, you have to have an alternative, right? You have to have something else to do, right? Because when the triggers come up, your brain will instantly start to crave the overstimulation, the dopamine hit that came from that old activity that you used to do. But without an alternative activity or routine, you'll naturally just fall back into your old routine of overstimulation, right? So how can you break this? Well, first I'm just going to quickly explain how I actually went from drinking, smoking, watching social media all day, eating really shitty food, right? Having an awful diet, to training as an athlete, having a clean diet, right? Building my business, reading books every day, and pretty much all day at this point, right? And I still have time for myself, right? I still have time to sit down and just meditate, relax, contemplate on things, reflect, write. That's one activity that I personally enjoy, right? Like that's a hobby of mine at this point, is writing. And it's beautiful because that's a hobby that actually benefits my business as well. So I have time for hobbies as well. I have time to go snowboarding with my friends. I have time to spend with my friends, although I don't spend much time with them right now because a lot of them are into drinking and partying and I'm just not with it. But my friends who still are, well, not still, but my friends who are actually about it, right? We go snowboarding together, and we'll hang out when we can. But I have the time and the freedom to do all of this, right? While being able to build my business, while being able to train and develop myself as an athlete, while being able to go to the gym, while being able to maintain a good diet, right? And I cook most of my food, so that does take up a lot of time often. But I've gotten good at managing that. So for example, meal prepping, right? Meal prepping allows me to reduce the amount of time it takes me to eat a clean diet. But one of the main things I'm teaching you here is that the reason I'm able to do this at such a high level, right? The reason I'm able to effectively do all of this is because I've removed all of the other activities, all of the overstimulating activities, all of the other dopamine activities. And so now when I lock in, I'm hyper productive and I can produce more in a shorter period of time, right? Because not only does the motivation help, the wanting to be there help, but dopamine also is directly correlated with how much you can actually produce in a given period of time, right? So all of these things are a benefit of just not doing certain activities, right? I'm not going to give you a bunch of tips and tactics for more things you can do. It's actually a matter of reducing the activities that are blocking your natural release of dopamine that allows you to enjoy the work and produce at a high level, right? So the best part of it is that I have more fun doing this anyways, right? I have much more fun creating videos and creating content. Let's say reading a book, training. I love training. I love sports. I love working out, right? I love going to the gym. All of these things, I enjoy them, right? I have much more fun doing these things than I ever did doing any of the bad habits, right? I could go through the list and explain all of the terrible times I had with each of them, right? But in general, even when it wasn't bad, when it was seemingly good and fun and enjoyable, it was nothing compared to my life now and my overall quality of life now, right? And that's because doing the work that you really desire to do is the thing that will boost your dopamine levels, will produce energy, right? So a lot of people think that you'll be drained if you work too hard, but that's because they're working on the wrong things, right? If you're working on the right things, you will be left with more energy, more dopamine, more desire, more motivation, more overall a better state of being. So when I started building my first business, I was 15, and I honestly thought it would be easy. And to be fair, it could have been, right? It could have been really easy. So I was younger, getting into drop shipping, right? Because I thought, I could make a bunch of money here, and it doesn't take time away from my training and development as an athlete, right? That was my main focus, was that I could make money, but not sacrifice being an athlete to do so. But day after day, I kind of found myself slipping back into my old routine of comfort, right? After setting the intention to start working on my business, I kept finding that I would just slip back into my comfortable routine, right? The things that I was already doing day to day. And so it felt like hell trying to sit down and think through problems, right? Actually like work through the problems that I was facing in my business that would have helped me to move the needle forward, instead of just living in that comfort, right? That state of comfort and ease that comes from focusing on the easy habits, right? And building a business, as fun as it is slightly more challenging than sitting down and scrolling through social media, because you don't have to really use your brain, right? You don't have to think. You don't have to concentrate on a problem, on something that's difficult, and find ways to overcome it, right? Find ways to beat that challenge, right? And so that original business ended up failing because I didn't put in the amount of effort needed. And then, of course, there's other reasons, like the fact that it didn't feel like a purposeful business for me. So even now, I bet I could, but I won't follow through on that because it doesn't seem like the thing I really want to do. I chose YouTube. Even though it might take me longer to make money, it's something that feels purposeful. And so it's the thing I chose to focus on, right? But at that time, I was focused on drop shipping, and I could not get myself into the groove of actually creating and building that business, at least to the degree I needed to in order to be successful there consistently, right? So I wasn't able to consistently work on that business because I was so addicted to the comfort and the ease that came from just living in this overstimulation cycle, living in this living in the comfort that my addictions provided, right? Living in the pleasure that I was getting from these bad habits, right? So the only thing I could figure out to do in this case was cut these bad habits from my life and completely, right? The only thing I really found in order to become more productive at this point was just cutting all these bad habits from my life, because I couldn't even use productivity tactics because I couldn't sit down and do the work, right? I couldn't really couldn't focus on things like mindset because I wasn't in a position where I was doing the work, right? So the only thing that I could do was remove the activities that were distracting me from the work, and then productivity tactics, mindset tricks, and stuff like that are very much helpful, very much useful, very important even, right? But the first step is actually transitioning from being focused on doing the activities that are easy, comfortable, and pleasurable to focusing on doing the activities that will lead you towards success in your business, right? And so that's when I discovered self-improvement, right? That's how I discovered self-improvement, and more importantly for this video, dopamine detox, right? The idea of only getting dopamine from things like work, exercise, reading, learning, meditation, and eating healthy food, right? Because for me now, honestly, eating healthy is one of the most pleasurable things I do, right? Eating my meals at the end of the day is one of the most pleasurable things I do. And I eat like beef, rice, salads, fruit, nuts. I eat very clean, very simple stuff. And that is very enjoyable, very pleasurable for me because of the fact that I've reduced all the other forms of overstimulation, right? This meant doing absolutely none of the bad habits, right? So that you reserve your energy and your dopamine for the good ones. Therefore, you're able to enjoy them a lot more, right? Therefore, because you are reserving your energy, you're reserving your attention, you're reserving your dopamine for the good activities, you enjoy them a lot more. And so therefore, you're also able to produce a lot more, right? But, so the only problem was actually cutting out the bad habits, right? Cutting them just didn't work, right? Just removing them didn't work. You had to have a replacement habit, right? You had to have something that scratched a similar itch, but in a healthy way, right? You had to have, let's say, for example, social media. It didn't mean cut social media and leave a block of time open. It meant cut social media and replace it with work, in my example, right? It meant cut social media and replace it with a book or longer form content on YouTube, or even courses, right? Coursera is great. Has a lot of very high level courses that you can take for completely free, by the way. But doing things that would actually teach you something valuable, right? Doing these activities that would teach you something valuable versus watching brain rot. And even for those of you who have like created your feed, your algorithm to be self-improvement and e-commerce and business and entrepreneurship, athleticism, whatever, right? Even if it's somewhat educational and productive, the simple act of scrolling on any type of social media app, so TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, even if you're using like YouTube Shorts, bullshit like that. I at a point, right, about 2 to 3 months before I quit completely, even more probably like 6 months, the majority of the time I remember using TikTok, this was the case where my entire algorithm, I had like intentionally made my entire algorithm to be self-improvement, entrepreneurship, business, and athleticism, right? So sports, training, the gym, diet, healthy food. I was getting so many recipes, right? But I never actually learned anything valuable because I was constantly scrolling. Every time I'd get a new insight or a piece of information, I'd end up scrolling right after and forgetting it, right? And this is the process that happens when you don't give your brain enough time to actually fully process a piece of information. It just forgets it, right? So even if your algorithm is based on education, it is still not the right option because you aren't actually learning anything from it. You're still just entertaining, right? So it's a form of mental masturbation because you aren't focusing on a concept long enough to actually learn it and then apply it, right? So transitioning from any type of social media over to some longer form type of content where you're actually going to be able to learn something valuable, or let's say it's a drug, or let's say it's porn, switching over to focusing on training and the gym or a business, right? So focusing on learning something valuable, building something, creating something, or training and developing your health and your body, right? Or if you're an athlete, training your sport, right? Developing your sport. So if you guys want one-to-one help breaking your bad habits and replacing them with more productive activities, then go down to the description below and click the link. You guys can book a one-on-one call with me to discuss whether or not you're a fit for the program, or you could just go down to that second link and you can go and check out my Instagram. You can DM me there and we'll talk about it over DMs instead. So why exactly breaking a bad habit is so hard in the first place, right? So one of the main reasons that it's a struggle is because you're leaving a block of time and, more importantly, energy open, right? So when you remove the habit, you're leaving that block of time unattended, right? You're leaving that block of time completely open, but you're also leaving a portion of energy open as well, right? So a lot of people don't talk about this. A lot of people talk about the time thing and how the cravings will come up at that specific period of time. But the other thing is that you have associated a certain amount of energy, right? You've put forth a certain amount of energy to this thing on a daily basis for however long. And so naturally your body builds up this energy at that period of time, right? And so that's why you go to TikTok is that initial burst of energy that motivates you towards social media and TikTok or whatever else it may be, right? Porn is a major example of this because it's a large portion of your energy that comes up before you give into that addiction. And so what happens is when we don't have that activity, we have all of this energy and we have all of this time free that we don't know what else to do with, right? And so naturally, most people fall into another bad habit or fall back into the old bad habit, right? And so the alternative is basically taking that energy, taking that time, and putting it forth towards something else, right? So when you first remove the bad habit, you're committing to not doing an activity that you normally do every day, likely at the same time, likely in the same places, right? Meaning if you change nothing else, you will naturally flow through your day with these triggers showing up. And they will be trying to drag you into your old routine, right? They will be trying to pull you back into the way that you were before, not the way you're trying to be now, right? And so your old habit once occupied this block of time. So now that we've removed it, that block of time is left completely open with nothing new to fill it, right? And so we need to find something else that can fill that gap for us. So this is where mindfulness can play a major role in your success or failure in your recovery from these addictions, right? Because if you're able to stay mindful and aware, you can redirect yourself, you can redirect your energy, redirect your attention, use that time differently. But if you lose awareness, if you lose a state of mindfulness, your old habitual patterns will overcome and overtake your ability to initiate a different action. But aside from mindfulness, the best thing that we can do is learn to replace the old habit with something that suits a similar need, but in a more productive rather than destructive way, right? So most of the time, these habits are actually destructive for us, right? We do it to fill a certain need, but over time, it actually destroys our ability to do this thing. A great example is weed, right? A lot of people smoke weed out of a desire for a state of peace, right? Peace of mind, ease of mind, lack of thinking. But what's funny about that is weed actually causes what is the opposite of meditation, which is mindlessness, right? So we want mindfulness. We want to be calm, serene, present, and not full of thoughts. Well, smoking weed over a long period of time actually causes more thoughts, uncontrollable thoughts, causes you to be trapped in your own mind, causes more anxiety and unease, right? So actually, it's more of a destructive thing than anything else, right? But if we were to meditate, we temporarily have to face the discomfort of all of this overthinking, of all of this discomfort that we face, all of this dis-ease, right? And I'm not talking about regular disease, but that's where disease is derived from, is this state, this internal state of not being centered and relaxed, right? Being kind of anxious and essentially just irritated is a good word for it, right? Having this internal state of irritation. With meditation, we temporarily face it, but over a long period of time of doing meditation, we actually build within us this state of peace. And so it becomes a part of us instead of it being like this temporary escape that we get from the weed, when over time the weed actually causes us to experience more of the discomfort that we're trying to avoid and run away from, right? Whereas meditation is the opposite. We face the discomfort up front, but over time it actually reduces the amount of discomfort overall. The next point, the next reason why breaking bad habits is so hard is boredom, right? So when we remove the thing that we normally do for fun and enjoyment and pleasure, we will often find ourselves bored, right? If we do not find an alternative to our old routine, we will likely find ourselves becoming bored, right? This boredom is what leads most to relapse and returning to our old habits. The solution, however, is one that you really won't like to hear, to be honest, right? The solution is to embrace the boredom, right? The solution is to actually fully embrace that boredom, right? Why? Because this is the sign that your brain is in recovery mode. This is your brain's process of rebalancing, right? Returning back to homeostasis, right? So your brain is in recovery mode and you're healing, right? This is the process of healing. At your level of overstimulation, the only things that will actually feel fun are the bad habits, which is unfortunate, right? Because that means there's no real solution except to wait, right? The only real solution is time. But obviously, like, I'm giving you some tools that will help make this time easier, but just being aware that it's going to suck for a bit. You're going to be bored. You're going to be like, well, what the fuck do I do now? I want to go and do the thing that was stimulating and enjoyable before, but now I have nothing to do during this block of time. But as we reintegrate back into real life and we begin to regain that joy that used to come from just living, right? Just being in your day-to-day life, rather than needing to seek external stimulus. So the boredom we feel is a temporary pain, but it is the natural pain that comes as a result of all the pleasure we have been indulging, right? So I've talked about this in previous videos, the pleasure-pain balance, right? The scale within our brain that perceives pleasure and pain. When we overindulge pleasure, that balance is then tipped to the side of pain. That is the pain we experience when we're in between uses of, let's say, our drug, or we get off of TikTok, right? So you might feel when you get on TikTok, you're like bored, you don't feel good, you want to go like scroll and be mindless. But notice how you feel after. You almost always significantly feel worse. I cannot think of a single example where I felt better after scrolling on TikTok, but I can think of many examples where I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, I feel so much worse than when I started. And if you are one of the rare individuals who actually experiences more enjoyment of life after turning off your phone from TikTok, not by watching and scrolling on TikTok, yeah, it's fun and enjoyable. Yeah, turn your phone off and tell me how you feel, right? If you are one of the rare few who feels good after scrolling and binging on TikTok, right, go ahead and comment down below, because I want to see. I highly doubt there will be a single comment. But we know and we're aware that doing this thing actually makes us more bored, gives us less enjoyment over time, right? But it is temporarily stimulating our brain, right? It is temporarily giving us something to do. Whereas it's actually creating this state of boredom. So when you indulge, the balance is tipped to the side of pain, right? And so what that leads to is this state of boredom, this state of discomfort from just sitting and being like by yourself, right? I can sit for hours with no problem. I had a friend say something about this the other day, because we took a road trip to go snowboarding, and I just sat there like the entire time. I wasn't driving. He was in control of the music. I was just kind of sitting there looking out the window. I had no work to do, so I wasn't on my phone, and that was as far as my thinking went with it. But he mentioned to me how it's amazing how I could just sit there for hours on end, completely like content. Right? No boredom came over me. No sense of discomfort came over me, except my back kind of hurt because I was eating shit. But, excuse me. But, first runs of the season, so we're gonna call it there. I was eating it a lot though. But the point was, there was no like internal sense of pain or discomfort with the fact that I didn't have like some random form of stimulation, right? Like if I really needed to, I could have gone and like downloaded some apps on my phone and like scrolled or whatever. My girl was busy, so like I wasn't texting her. It was late, so she was probably like getting ready for bed or whatever. But I just remember like I couldn't text her. Other than that, I had no desire to be on my phone, so I just didn't go on it. Like I just didn't think about it. I didn't use it. I just stared out the window, was thinking about content, was thinking about some videos I wanted to make, because, I'm sure I'll get into it in one of my car videos, but for a period of time, I haven't been making content. So, like, I've been trying to get back into that groove of things and start making more content. So I was thinking about ideas for what types of content to make, like what videos I was really looking to get into, just some ideas for my upcoming project, which I'm not going to announce to you guys yet, but there's something big coming for you guys. So I was just thinking, right? And that was natural. But for most people, that would cause a level of discomfort, a level of boredom. And that isn't just because you need stimulation. It's because you've been so addicted to stimulation for so long that your balance is essentially always tipped to the side of pain. And so you seek that stimulation to offset that feeling of pain. But if you simply go through that state, right, go through feeling that pain for a long enough period of time without re-stimulating, without going back to that old activity, that old habit, you will be able to naturally, over time, feel more and more serene, present, right, grounded within this moment. And so you won't need that extra stimulation, right? Because trust me, once you have gained true presence, and I mean true presence, right, life is already too stimulating as is, right? I promise you life is already too stimulating. There's already so much going on in reality. You don't need it. And the only reason you seek that type of stimulation is because reality is actually too overwhelming. in most cases, right? It's not that it's too boring, it's just that you've become desensitized to it. All right, so the next reason why breaking bad habits is so hard is just because you have a lack of intention for what else to do in your life, right? So you don't really know what else to do with your life. You're kind of lost and directionless. And so because of that, you don't really got much to do other than the bad habits, right? You don't got much to do other than the easy, stimulating activities, and you don't have enough intentionality to break those bad habits, right? Because it takes a lot of effort to break these bad habits, right? It takes a lot of energy to break these bad habits. So if you don't have a reason, if you don't have a vision, if you don't have a goal, you're not gonna really be able to generate enough energy, enough momentum to break the habits in the first place, right? So one of the biggest things to do is start with that intention, start with that goal. So if you don't have a vision for your life, a goal to work towards, you will naturally begin to drift towards comfort and pleasure, right? You will naturally just be in this state of drifting. You don't know where to go. You're kind of just going with the flow. And naturally, that flow will be towards degeneration, right? So generation is created out of conscious will and effort. Degeneration is the natural flow of things, right? If you look at nature, nature dies, right? It's just a given, right? Everything in nature decays over time, dies, and its energy is repurposed, right? We as the conscious principle, we as the conscious being have the ability to put forth effort and energy in order to create a sense of growth, create a state of progression, right? Movement. And that requires conscious effort and conscious will, right? But if we remove that and just allow our bodies to be just our bodies and minds to be in control, essentially, we will drift towards this pleasure, this easy lifestyle, and ultimately degeneration and death, right? So if you've been in a routine of overstimulation, then that means you probably don't really have much of a goal, or at the very least, you don't have clarity on your goals, right? So you will need to create a goal. You'll need to set an intention for a goal. If you want to actually move towards a better direction, right? If you want to start creating a better life for yourself, you need to have the goal. You need to know exactly what that looks like, right? Otherwise, in the moment at least, the best direction will seem to be that comfort, right? That isn't the case, never, right? It is never actually the case, even if you have nothing else to do with your life. Most won't do this, but to be frank, that's why they aren't successful. If you don't have anything to do with your life, if you genuinely don't know what to do, you shouldn't be sitting there indulging. You shouldn't be sitting there scrolling on social media. You shouldn't be sitting there watching pointless YouTube videos, right? You should be sitting with yourself and thinking and focusing on that, right? Literally concentrating on where do I want to go? What direction do I want to take? There's nothing else you could do or should do in that in-between space, right? But again, most won't actually do that, which is kind of the problem. But you need to sit with yourself long enough to set the intention, create a clear goal, and then you can begin to actually move towards it. And that movement towards it will begin with breaking the bad habits, right? And so breaking the bad habits becomes easier when you have a reason to do so, when you have a why, right? When it's not just to break the bad habits, but it's actually to become a new person and achieve this goal that you have, right? So having a clear goal gives you the understanding that your bad habits are actually harming you on your real path, right? Because if you're just drifting, if you're just doing whatever feels good in the moment, the bad habits won't seem like the worst thing in the world. But if you have this clear goal that you want to achieve in a year, 2 years, right, even a few months, you will be able to identify that, oh, this is really hindering my ability to grow. This is really hindering my progress towards this goal that I have. And so you will be more easily able to choose a better alternative, choose a better habit instead. So having a clear goal gives you the understanding that your bad habits are actually harming you on your real path. But if you're only focused on how you feel now, right, in the moment, you will delude yourself into thinking that these bad habits are somehow good in some way, shape, or form, right? But with a clear goal, with a clear intention, you know that your actions directly affect how quickly you can progress towards that end goal, right? So before even worrying about quitting, set a goal, set an intention for what you'd like to achieve, giving you more of an incentive to then go and quit, right? And that's not to say put off quitting. That's to say the first step will be setting this new intention and setting your why for quitting. And then it will be easier to take the necessary steps, the necessary actions in order to make that change. So this next section is a little bit of a mindset right? So I'm addressing a mindset here, not so much practical steps. But this section is all about why the bad habits aren't actually the root problem, right? So bad habits themselves are not the root problem, and we'll get into it. But the root problem is actually the fact that you are unfulfilled within yourself, within your purpose, and you don't have this direction. You aren't working towards something more valuable, and so you naturally drift and fall into these bad habits instead, right? So bad habits aren't the root problem. You are the root problem, and it's simply this state of being that you encompass, that you embody, that leads you towards the bad habits instead of the good ones, right? For example, if you were to identify as an athlete, you wouldn't do these bad habits, right? If you were to identify as an entrepreneur, you wouldn't do these bad habits. You identify as whatever you identify as, and that state of being leads you towards the bad habits, right? So let's get into it. The first point here is that they serve a purpose, right? They serve a purpose and provide something that you need / lack, just in the wrong way, right? So they actually do fulfill a need that you have, but in a false way, right? It's essentially the equivalent of numbing the pain of that need versus solving the problem. So a bad habit is simply a crutch, right? It's something that you lean on to serve this need that you have without exerting your own effort, right? So you don't put it forth your own effort to change the situation or solve the problem. You use it as a crutch to lean on when you have these problems in order to numb the pain associated. This means that you use it to avoid the real work that it takes to solve your problem and instead numb it out with something easier, right? And so the root of the problem is not the vice itself, but your actual inability to address your true problem, right? You need to learn how to identify what is wrong instead of turning to comfort and then act to better yourself, right? Better yourself or the situation, right? Whatever it really entails. But most cases it's you. Most cases it's a matter of actually changing and transforming yourself. And then obviously acting in a way that will allow you to better that state of being, and that will naturally reflect within the situation. And then there's obviously cases where just addressing the situation is the necessary step. But instead of seeking comfort to avoid the pain associated with addressing your current circumstances, you have to actually do something actively that will allow you to overcome and break that specific pain point, that specific problem, right? Break through to the other side. Instead of staying stuck and trapped within the old reality or the old state of being. The next point is that you are seeking growth, but you are actually settling for the lesser form of it, right? So most of the time, we're not even really seeking the pleasure itself, but the pursuit of it, right? We find enjoyment in the exertion of effort itself, but we've learned to settle for the more comfortable version of this, the version that provides instant relief instead of long-term gain, right? So the same effort that you put into smoking weed every day, watching your social media apps. I mean, some of y'all sit in class with your phones under your desks just to scroll, right? Imagine if you were building a business on your phone at the same time, putting that same effort and energy into building a business. Over time, that's more fulfilling, but it requires a little more effort and a little more energy. Right, but it's the same thing, right? You're putting in the same amount of effort. It's just that you have to take that next little step, right? Put in that next little bit of effort to make it more fulfilling in the long term, rather than settling for not having to put in as much effort, but still feeling that state of pursuit, still feeling that enjoyment that comes from the pursuit, that comes from initiation of effort, right? We don't even really want the pleasure. In fact, for most of us, it's not even pleasurable, right? We don't even receive the pleasure. It's the pursuit of it that we are actually chasing, right? It is the pursuit of a form of growth that we are actually chasing. But we're not growing very much when we're watching TikTok. We're not growing very much smoking weed. But we still experience that same dopamine hit because it gives us a state similar to that of accomplishment of the goal, right? So think about weed, for example. Weed puts you in a state of being where you are more relaxed, more in the state of pleasure. You have more dopamine, right? And so this is akin to the state of fulfillment that you get from achieving a goal. Not exactly the same, but it is similar in a sense. And so it actually gives you a similar level of fulfillment. And so you seek that fulfillment that you feel from smoking the weed, but you don't actually get true fulfillment. And so it's only a fleeting high. And that's why you're constantly in the cycle of chasing more and more and more. Whereas with business, yes, you're still in that cycle of chasing more and growing more, right? That pursuit of more and more growth, more and more progression. But you also have moments where you can sit back and feel fulfilled. Sit back and look back and be like, yeah, wow, like I really did that. Yeah, I still want to keep going further, but like, yo, like I did that shit. Like that's awesome. Like I feel good about the fact that I did accomplish this thing. Whereas with weed or social media, you look back and you're like, wow, I just lost 3 hours, like just scrolling on my phone, right? Just messing with my finger, like just twitching my thumb for 3 hours of my day. And I don't remember anything I watched. I didn't learn or gain anything valuable from anything I watched. I just did it, right? It just happened. So it is this pursuit of a form of growth that we're seeking. It's just that we falsely tricked ourselves into getting that dopamine hit from the bad habits instead of the real habits that will actually lead to more growth, right? So we find enjoyment in the exertion of effort itself, right? But we've settled for the more comfortable version of this, the version that provides the instant relief instead of long-term gain, right? So we've settled for a version that provides an instant relief for our desire to achieve more with our lives, instead of putting in a little more effort that will actually result in the long-term gain that we're seeking. Our desire is truly that of growth and effort towards achieving a goal, but modern day technology has disrupted and taken advantage of this natural desire. So we simply need to learn to redirect this need for stimulation towards our work and our goals, right? Because we do need this form of stimulation. We do need dopamine, right? We need energy. We need to be putting forth effort, right? But what are we putting it towards, right? We just need to redirect it towards the right habits, towards the good habits, right? Towards our work, towards learning, towards training and building our bodies, right? Towards developing our health, our minds, our spirits, our souls, right? So we need to put this effort, this desire for effort towards something that will actually create in the long term a valuable state of being or a valuable result. So our next point, similar to the first, but the bad habits supplement something that you truly need, right? So these bad habits, though they are bad, they are supplementing something that you do truly need, right? So typically you find a bad habit in place of something truly positive, right? Where normally someone might rest after a long day of work to recenter, reset, and heal, right? You smoke weed, scroll on your phone, or maybe sit down and play some video games, right? They seemingly achieve the same goal, right? They seem to achieve the same goal, but one is much more effective than the other, right? Truly resting allows you to recenter and reset so that you can get back to work the next day. But video games or scrolling actually saps more of your mental energy and your dopamine, meaning you don't actually go through any real regeneration, right? You don't actually heal in any way. You don't regenerate in any way. You don't recenter yourself in any way. You don't actually get this real state of rest that we're looking for, right? You simply get the pleasure of zoning out mentally, right? So the rest that you think you're getting is just the fact you no longer have to think, which isn't true rest at all, right? It's going into a state of mindlessness in order to not have to actively choose the right things. But rest is actually sitting or sleeping, if that's as far as it needs to go, right? Is just sitting and being for a second and recentering yourself for a second. Therefore, you are avoiding the real work of letting yourself rest and instead settling for the easy pleasure of mindlessly moving on to video games or social media, right? So a lot of people diss rest and recovery, but their alternative is scrolling, right? Their alternative is for some people in entrepreneurship, their alternative is just messaging and answering DMs, right? So they say, some people say that rest is bad, and some people say that rest is very important. Both of these groups, however, are doing the opposite, right? Both of these groups, however, are allowing themselves to mindlessly move on and calling it rest instead of truly resting, right? So NSDR, for example, non-sleep deep rest, is an activity that you can do actively. It takes a little bit of effort to decide to do it instead of scrolling, but if you do it, you will actually be able to rest your body, rest your mind, and reset. And then move forward, move on with whatever else. You can do breath work, right? You can meditate, you can read, you can just sit down and stare at a wall. You can take a nap if you need, right? You can sleep early. Actually resting, though, takes a little more effort. However, it actually solves the issue, right? It actually solves the problem, right? So the bad habits are supplementing something you truly need. For most people who want to work more and work harder, right? They want to be on their purpose, but they haven't found it yet, and they haven't gotten themselves to put in that effort. They're doing things that drain their energy, so they no longer feel this desire to do more, right? So for example, for a while, I was smoking weed and going to the gym. That made me feel a sense of accomplishment because I was going to the gym, and the weed allowed me to suppress more of my desire to keep doing more, right? Because then I would feel tired after the gym, but only because I smoked, not because I was actually tired from the gym, right? And so that allowed me to essentially ease my desire to do more, right? So for those of you scrolling on social media, it's that you want to do something. It's that you want something to do. You want activities to do. You want work to do. You want to learn, but it takes more effort than scrolling, so you choose to scroll, right? So it's not that the bad habits are actually a problem. It's that your choice to supplement something you truly need with something that won't actually serve it long term, but temporarily gives you more comfort, more ease around that thing. That is the reason why you are stuck in this cycle, right? So the bad habit isn't the problem. It's your choice to not address the real problem, the real issue, which is an internal state of wanting and desiring more from your life. So identify the need / craving that your addiction serves, right? So the first step to breaking a bad habit is identifying why you do it in the first place, right? What is the need that it supplements for, right? So just like we talked about in the last section, each habit has something it's supplementing for. So identify what that need is. Identify why you do it. Once you have identified that, it becomes much easier to figure out what else you could be doing instead to serve that same need, but in a better way. Right? So identify what exactly you could be doing that would actually serve this need that you have in a more positive way, in a more fulfilling way, right? In a more complete way, right? But isn't something that, let's say your addiction is something like, say it's scrolling on social media, you want to learn more, you could read a book, but instead, I can't really think of an example. There's no bad replacement habits, by the way. So I can't really think of real examples of this. But if you're replacing a habit, let's say it's porn, for example. Porn, for most people, comes up as an excess of masculine energy because most of us aren't on our masculine purpose, giving these real gifts, actually working to our fullest capacity. So we have more masculine energy built up inside of us than we know what to do with. So porn comes in for a lot of cases here. If your alternative to porn is something that actually leaves you with more energy, right? So it's something more relaxing. This can be, not necessarily detrimental. Let's say it's like reading or something. It can't be detrimental. Like I said, there's no bad replacement habits, but it won't fully serve this need that we have, right? If you're addicted to porn because you're bored and you need something relaxing to do, a book makes sense. But if it's because of this excess of energy, we want to replace it with a habit that will allow us to get this excess of energy out, but in a more healthy way, right? So exercise is typically the best alternative if that's the case, right? So identify what habits will actually help you to overcome and serve this need, but in a more complete and fulfilling way, right? So think of the good habits as the permanent solution and the bad habits as an easy momentary distraction from the pain. If you learn to replace the bad habits with a good one that actually helps you to overcome the pain, then you will no longer need the bad habit, right? You will no longer feel this craving for it, right? That craving will actually start to subside. But this won't happen overnight, right? You need to actively work towards the better habit over falling into the comfort of the familiar one, right? But if you do this consistently over time, your brain will be rewired to associate the solution with the good habit instead of the bad one. So next, identify what habits would serve the same purpose, but in a better way. Right? So, for example, right now you seek entertainment or consumption of information. So you grab your phone, right? You start scrolling on some social media app, right? Alternative, you seek entertainment and consumption of information or learning. So you reach for a book, right? Simple as that, right? And obviously it's not a simple process, but it is the mindset that's very important, right? It's you want the same things, but it's all about what you choose to do with that desire. So now that you've identified the need that your bad habit actually attempts to serve, Now identify what habit, if put in place of that bad one, would effectively serve the same purpose, but obviously in a better way, in a complete way that actually helps you to overcome the problem instead of numbing the problem. For example, if you want to consume content, right, instead of scrolling on TikTok, intentionally search for a long form educational video to watch instead, or better yet, you could read a book, right? But there are levels to the game. If you are completely addicted to social media, work your way up to a full book by starting with the long form educational content. So essentially, like, if you are addicted to social media, what you can do instead is, instead of mindlessly scrolling whatever content is showed to you, intentionally say, all right, I want to learn about this topic, find a video, a longer form video on YouTube, and watch that instead, right? And then slowly transition that into longer videos, even courses, and then eventually books. So the next step is actually the hard one, right? But the next time you feel the craving for your old habit, for your old routine, simply go back towards the alternative, right? Instead of unconsciously falling into that same routine, actually consciously direct yourself towards the new habit that we've set in place, right? The new habit that we've decided upon. So now this is the hard part, as I mentioned, right? Now it is important to stay aware of your state of being and your state of mind, right? Now you have to stay conscious of the actions that you take moving forward to ensure that you follow the new routine, right? Instead of falling into the bad routine, the old routine, right? Instead of falling back into your bad habits. Every time you get the craving for your old habit, first remind yourself not just that this new habit is what you want to do, but rather that it is who you are, right? So it's not just something you want to do now instead of the other thing. It is who you are, right? It is closer to who you truly are. Even if it doesn't feel true, you need to tell yourself this in order to create a foundation for you to fall back on, right? If your foundation of who you are, right? So if the identity that you hold more closely relates to the old habits, right? The old person that you were, it will be more natural for you to fall into that routine. If your identity is that of an entrepreneur and an athlete, it will be easier for you to then move towards training and working. So use that new identity as a foundation for how you move throughout your day, right? But also use the new habit we selected in the previous sections as a crutch to fall back on when you find yourself craving the old habit, right? So every time you find yourself craving that old habit, we identified what your alternative could be. Always fall back onto that alternative, right? Just keep falling back onto that alternative over and over and over again, and eventually you'll be able to program your brain to prioritize it instead. This, over time, not immediately, will train your brain to find what it craves in the old habit in the new one instead, right? If we picked the right habit, we will find that the craving actually goes away as this new habit really serves the need that we had, but in a concrete way, in a more concrete way, right? So this means we will effectively retrain our brain to associate this new habit with that problem or that pain point instead of the distractions and the easy pleasure, right, that we normally seek, right? So we will train our brain to associate doing the habit that solves the problem with the pain and problem instead of doing the habit that numbs the pain or problem. So my last section here, these are just some tips to help you change your habits more effectively, right? So first thing is make the new habits easy, right, by setting up your environment to optimize for them. So now that you've committed to changing your habits and your behavior, start by setting up your environment, right? So the first thing that you should do right now is actually set up your environment. Go ahead and remove reminders or triggers of the old habit and set up your environment to optimize for the good ones instead. So an example of this is if you're a big weed smoker and you have all of your shit in your room, or if you are watching social media and you have the apps on your phone, right? Or junk food, for example, if you have it in your kitchen, right? So remove these things from your environment, right? If you're smoking weed and you're trying to quit, get rid of your grinder, right? Get rid of your rolling tray and your little ashtray and your bowl and shit. Throw away the weed. This won't immediately help you to overcome it, right? People say, oh, don't just throw away the weed. Clear it from your environment so that you can more easily reinforce the new identity. And it creates this friction between you and the old habit, right? So if you think you're just going to buy it up again, right, that's kind of a problem you have to address within yourself. But you should be able to clean out the environment, clear out the environment, reset that state of being, and optimize it for the good habits instead, right? So removing all the shit from your room, and instead putting a book in your room. So, for example, if your goal is to start reading more, is to replace your bad habit with reading, then first buy a book if you haven't already, right? That's the very first step if you don't even have a book. But then once you have a book or you have multiple books, leave it right on your desk, right? As the first thing that you see, and then therefore grab when you sit down at your desk, right? Instead of it being your laptop that you normally watch YouTube on, or your phone where you scroll on social media, have it be the book right there, right? You could actually even go as far as leaving a book next to your phone, so that when you go to grab your phone, just for like some entertainment or whatever, and not something actually productive, you'll have the reminder to read instead, right? So another example is if your goal is to do more work instead of procrastinating, then leave the tab open, right? And only your work-related tabs open, right? But leave your work-related tab and only your work-related tab open on your computer, so that as soon as you turn it on and open it, the first thing that you see is your work task, right? The first thing that you see is your work task, right? And so that will remove friction from doing the work and add friction to opening another app that might be a distraction. So looking at my computer right now, I have my script open that I'm reading off of for this video. I have a couple scripts that I'm writing, and that's it. And I organize mine into folders. So I have my work folder and I have my education folder. The only other tab that's not in either of these folders is just a blank tab, right? So I literally don't have anything on my computer open other than what is productive, other than what is based on my goal, based on the work that I'm trying to do right now. And so there's no distractions, right? I have nothing else that I would really want to do on my computer, to be honest. But if I did, let's say I was like still watching YouTube for entertainment, and YouTube was like a distraction from work. I do have YouTube open, I'm not gonna lie, but there is a 2-hour course that I'm watching on self-improvement. So like that's an educational video, so I don't even want to watch that until I have time to sit down and study it. So like if YouTube was a distraction, for an example, right? It's not for me, but if it was, I would maybe even remove the app off of my computer so that I have to type it in on the search bar. But also I would just leave the tab closed so that there's more friction between me switching over to YouTube than there is for me to just do the work, because the work is already there, right? And there's less friction between me and starting my work, because that's the first thing I open. The night before, I always organize my tabs so that I have my first work task first and then my last one last, and it's just in order. So I work through each of those tabs as I go throughout the day. So it's just a matter of optimizing your environment, digital and physical, to make it easier to do the right habits and make it harder to do the bad ones, right? This won't be an instant fix, but it will help in just allowing you to more effortlessly move into this new lifestyle. So the next tip to change your habits easier is to actually use a habit tracker as your guideline for what to do in the day, instead of basing it off of how you feel, right? So if you have a habit tracker, if you have a schedule, basically organizing your day or moving throughout your day based off of the written routine, the structure, instead of how you feel. Without a guideline to follow, an easy step-by-step of how to move throughout your day, you will naturally default to your unconscious routine, right? Which is your day-to-day habits, your current habitual routine, right? Since it requires no thinking, that is what you return to when you have nothing else or nowhere else to go, right? So the solution is to make your ideal day, right, into just as much of a no-brainer by putting your ideal day into a simple guideline or habit tracker, right? That way you have something to default back to when you get stuck, right? You make your ideal day just as easy of a choice as your current mindless routine, right? So by structuring your ideal day into a set of habits, into a hour-by-hour schedule, you make it much easier to actually follow that instead of falling back into your mindless routine, your current day-to-day routine, right? So this allows you to, over time, as you get used to it, have a clear and straightforward path for where to go, what to do, and how to move throughout your day. This means that just as you unconsciously fell into your old routine, you will be able to do the same now for your ideal, most productive day, right? So just as easy as it was to fall into your old routine, it will now be just as easy, if not easier, because it's consciously created, intentionally created, to fall into this most productive routine that you have, right? Your most productive day is now your natural flow of things. Making the good habits easy and simple to follow instead of overcomplicating them in your head, right? When you're arguing with this voice that's trying to pull you back, that's honestly just a waste of time and effort and energy, right? The only thing that's worth your time, effort, and energy is actively doing the things you need to do in order to make more progress, right? In order to actually move forward. This means that the friction that you face when trying to go without the bad habits will be reduced, as there's no longer an internal battle to face within the mind, only the battle of moving forward and taking action, right? But no thinking is actually required for what actions to take, making them much easier to do, right? So we remove the friction of having to figure out what else to do with ourselves by creating the structure. And then so we can naturally just focus on moving through the day within the structure, no matter how we feel, right? And if we do this over a long period of time, we will naturally shift. Our brain will reprogram. We'll shift our attention over to the delayed gratification, the productivity, the work that we want to be doing, instead of the distractions that we currently do. So the next tip for changing your habits more easily is avoiding alternative sources of dopamine during the day, excluding your set of healthy habits, right? So we've set a list, or even just one healthy habit, healthy alternative to the bad habits that we're doing. But in order to make this easier, right, in order to really reprogram the brain, we have to avoid any alternative sources of dopamine during the day, right? So we can't be replacing weed with social media, right? Because we're still stimulating dopamine, and eventually you will fall back into the old bad habit that you had, right? So we have to remove pretty much all types of overstimulation completely, which obviously is easier said than done. But it is the only way that we can actually fully overcome the bad habits, fully break the bad habits, and rewire our brain to be more focused on productivity instead, to derive its dopamine and enjoyment from productivity and production and creating something of value. So if you're trying to reprogram the brain to get its dopamine from healthy, non-extra stimulating activities, then you will only make it harder for yourself when you are also engaging in activities that spike dopamine, right? These spikes of dopamine lead to a depletion of dopamine after the fact, meaning that it becomes harder to re-engage one of the healthy but slightly less stimulating activities, right? So the more you do this, the more you get used to thinking that work or learning is boring but necessary, while only making them more draining and dreadful, right? By engaging in the unhealthy, overstimulating habits. So when you are trying to reprogram your brain, you need to remove all bad habits, not just some, right? You need to identify all of them and over time work towards removing all of them, right? It still takes time to get there. But this is the mindset that you need in order to really succeed, right? You have to carry this mindset with you throughout the process in order to actually succeed. So the more distracting and negative habits you do, the less you will desire to work, and by extension, the harder it will be. This is why you struggle so much to build momentum, because there is so much resistance built up between you and the work that it takes to achieve your goals that it just feels like a constant uphill battle to produce, and so therefore you're not actually really producing anything, right? You could be disciplined enough to try, but I promise you won't do nearly as much as I can do, because I enjoy the work, right? Because I actually can put forth massive amounts of energy and effort very easily, simply because of the fact that I enjoy it, right? I'm able to derive pleasure and enjoyment from doing it, and so it's naturally what I do when I'm bored, and then when I have extra energy, it's also what I'm doing. So therefore, I'm able to produce a lot more and at a faster pace, at a faster rate, at a higher rate, and with more quality, right? Overall quality of work is better because of the fact that I don't do any other alternatively stimulating activities, right? And so when we are trying to break these habits and actually change the way that our brain derives pleasure, right? So change where our brain gets enjoyment from. We have to remove all of the things that are going to overstimulate us, because it will create a new sense of dopamine depletion that just resets the whole cycle, right? what we're trying to do is resensitize ourselves to regular activities, real life, work, right? Exercise, and just being, right? Just being able to sit in presence and have that level of stimulation, right? I make this argument a lot. I actually, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna rag on him too hard and call him out, but I have a friend who like is really addicted to stimulation. And I observed the fact that I believe that I have more, like naturally, I have a higher level of stimulation and enjoyment and pleasure just sitting down staring at a wall than he does scrolling on social media. Like he's actually scrolling, and I genuinely believe that I'm more happy, more fulfilled, more content, and actually experiencing a higher level of stimulation because I'm more sensitized to regular stimulus. So my ability to receive enjoyment is higher just because of the fact that I don't do other activities that are more stimulating, right? If I was in that moment to go and scroll on social media, like I know what to do, how to reset my brain, but in the moments following, I would feel less stimulation than I do right now. Or if I was to turn off the video and stare at a wall, still, I would feel less stimulation after the fact than I would just staring at that wall. So if we are fully engaged in work, reading, or exercise, we forget everything else and become completely engrossed in our task, right? This is when it becomes more stimulating and enjoyable than all of the other bad habits, right? That we're trying to remove, right? So work becomes more stimulating than the other habits when it becomes like our base state of being, I guess you could say, right? So once we are completely and utterly engrossed into the task at hand, that is when we will start to associate more stimulation from the work than we do from the bad habits. And this is a lot to do with flow state, right? When we become completely engrossed into this state of flow, right? Into this natural flow state, that creates a higher level of stimulation than the bad habits do. And the way that we achieve this state of being is by only having these activities in our day, right? So they become the most fun, stimulating things that we do, right? By only having these activities, we resensitize our brains and dopamine levels to these types of activities. So that way, naturally, we can actually derive more enjoyment and more stimulation from them, right? Leading our brain to actually derive joy from them instead of a sense of dread and pain and discomfort, right? And this will eventually bring us to an overall state of enjoyment beyond anything that we could actually achieve within the fake pleasure, right? So this state of pleasure we get from the fake stimulation, the false enjoyment, or the false dopamine activities, I guess you could say, the fake forms of stimulation. I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say, but you know what I mean. Basically, when we really get into this, when we really start to reprogram the brain, we actually begin to create an overall sense of being, an overall state that is beyond, right? It's a state of enjoyment beyond anything that we could actually get from these fake pleasures, right? But we only do this by sacrificing those false forms of enjoyment. So the last thing I have for making habit change easier, a little more effortless, I guess you could say, is actually changing your identity to align with the new healthy habits instead of the old destructive ones, right? So the biggest struggle with changing habits, bad habits specifically, is our tendency to identify with what we are used to, right? So instead of identifying naturally with the best version of ourselves, we identify with what we repeatedly act as, right? So we identify with the version of ourselves we repeatedly act as, right? So the version that we are actually acting upon on a consistent basis is what we identify with, not our ideal. So meaning we are not actually our goals and intentions, but rather the actions we engage in on a daily basis. So the best way to change ourselves is to change our identity, right? And we do so by changing our habits, right? So these two technically go together, right? They have to happen together, however. Our habits determine our identity and vice versa, right? So the habits that we engage in on a daily basis determine our actual identity, but the identity that we actively embody, embrace, will also determine our habits, right? So changing our habits is a matter of changing our identity, not just our activities. So we have to do it together. we have to identify as an athlete in order to start going to the gym consistently, but we also have to go to the gym consistently in order to reinforce that identity. So if we begin to reinforce an identity that aligns with our goals, right, and the habits that it takes to achieve them, then we will effectively change our behavior, which will reinforce this new identity and then create this new cycle, right? So we're currently in a cycle of overstimulation and all of these bad habits, right? You identify with this person that you are, and then this person that you are engages in a certain set of activities, and that set of activities reinforces the identity, so on and so forth. That's the cycle you're currently living in. Whereas we can reverse the cycle by identifying with a better version of ourselves, engaging the activities that reinforce it. We reinforce that identity, and then we can then go and continue that cycle instead. So instead of the cycle working against us, our identity cycle, our identity and habit cycle begins to work for us, right? Suppose you focus on reinforcing the identity of a productive person, an entrepreneur, or an athlete. In that case, you will naturally start to align your life towards that. And as you do so, that new identity is what will begin to be reinforced, right? So by actively saying, this is the new identity I'd like to embody, finding activities that will reinforce that identity, doing those activities, and then therefore reinforcing said identity, you create a new cycle. You create a new state of being, a new state of mind, a new identity, and a new set of habits, and you can continuously reinforce this new state of being, this new identity, instead of the old one, right? And by making it an identity, this creates a foundation for you to fall back on when you are maybe having cravings again. You fall back on this identity of, well, I'm not a stoner, or, well, I'm not a lazy person, so I'm not going to go and scroll on social media, right? I'm not a bot, so I'm not going to go and scroll on social media, right? You naturally can fall into the better set of habits because you identify with a person that just doesn't do the habits, right? Instead of trying to change who you are by changing your habits, you change who you are to change your habits. So if you've made it this far into the video and you want to completely transform your habits and go from being stuck in this overstimulation cycle to being free to work towards your deepest purpose, go ahead and click either one of those links down below to work with me one-on-one. And other than that, if you'd like to see more content like this, go ahead and click the subscribe button. Go ahead and like this video. But other than that, that's all from me, and I'm out of here. Peace.